All right, I'm here with .LA's own Rachel Uranga, who has a really unique series out with Ben Bergman on the diversity issues facing the venture capital community. Rachel, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Kelly.
So let's jump in. In the wake of the protests coming out of George Floyd's death, we are seeing an outcry on social media from individuals and companies that change needs to happen. Now, we've certainly heard the rumors that the venture capital space has a diversity problem, but from your research, just how bad is it?
Well, I don't think it's any secret. I mean, it's a pretty white, exclusive world, mostly of men. And I think if you take a look at different surveys, and I think the NVCA, which is the industry standard, or I should say the industry group, the National Venture Capital Association, they say about 3% of investors at firms that they surveyed are Black. And that is probably being generous because many of the companies that they surveyed didn't respond.
Wow, 3%. That's mind-boggling. And to your point, it's probably even lower. So in your series, you spoke with a number of Black leaders in the community, Kobe Fuller at Upfront Ventures, Sydney Sykes of BLCK VC, and some of the quotes were astounding. Could you expand a little bit on the challenges that they've faced to navigating the VC world as a Black individual?
Sure. I think one of the problems are just seen in the numbers, right? I mean, there's so few and far between that they're often put in positions where they're like the only Black person in the room. And so they often have to stand up when they see that there's an issue. And people in that world often don't even see them as investors. I know both Kobe said, people would often look at him as if he was the wait staff. Or there's another investor who said she was often mistaken for the assistant in the room. So I think that their peers don't really perceive them as investors. And that is just like a self-perpetuating cycle because they aren't investors because they're not let in.
Those stories, those quotes from your series, everyone, please go read this. This is really incredible work. Were heartbreaking. The fact that someone thinks that they're a wait staff or they just don't deserve to be in the room, it's incredibly frustrating to have to deal with that every day. So some of the initiatives that you focused on in the series are trying to combat this. So could you talk a little bit about those that are trying to address the pipeline and inclusivity problem?
I think I'll start off by saying this. There hasn't been much done about this problem. And in part, it really hasn't even been recognized as a problem for many, many years. A lot of parallels that were drawn were between women and the industry as well. 2 years ago, you saw a backlash after the Me Too movement erupted, and there were real measures put in place that helped increase the number of women in the industry. And even at that, there's still sort of low compared to the population, how many women are. And so there's some thought in the industry that maybe the way that they implemented those measures, they can be seen similar measures taken for diversity so that more the candidates and firms, investors are more diverse. Venture Forward was something that the NBC came up with. It was kind of a couple years in the making. And that is intended in sort of diversifying the ranks through creating programs through universities and helping get people in the door. On the flip side is the LPs. And what some investors told me was that you really can't make any change unless the LPs, which are the limited partners who fund a lot of this, really push for it. The LPs are the people who represent pension funds and often serve a very diverse, well, not all LPs, but some of them represent pension funds, but they often serve a very diverse community. So there are firefighters, or policemen, et cetera. And the argument being that these LPs are investing in a system that is essentially perpetuating wealth for white individuals and excluding the very people who are investing in them. So the ILPA, which is the Industry Association for Limited Partners, a couple of years ago, in the wake of the Me Too movement, created disclosure forms when they were going out to GPs that essentially asked them to provide information on diversity, on hiring practices, etc. Those forms have, well, at least some investors say, have made a difference in some of the practices inside the firm. It's largely made a difference for women. And you haven't seen that trickle out for Black or brown folks.
Well, the comparison that you make to the Me Too movement, I think is a really powerful one, because I'm sure you and I both remember how much change came out of that. And it's at least heartening to see that potentially some of those measures that were put in place could help here as well. So now let's zooming out. I mean, you have a great knowledge of the space. Is this movement any different than what we saw 6 years ago? And is it going to lead to real change in the VC community, from your opinion?
Well, I think that's really going to depend on the VCs, right?
Mhm.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of skepticism for people who have been, knocking on the door about diversifying the ranks of investors. And I think it's going to take those who are very successful and very powerful firms to change, and not until they change are we going to see that trickle down. And I can say this because you can start a lot of smaller firms that may even be focused solely on people of color, but the problem is that in this game, it's a very self-perpetuating game. So the most successful tend to be more successful because they are successful, so they bring on the most successful entrepreneurs and sort of grow their empire and continue to be more successful. And so you really have to get buy-in from those folks. And if you look at the reaction among VCs after this, I mean, you've seen two prominent firms, I think it was SoftBank and Anderson Horowitz, that set up a fund, but that's it. And we'll see how it plays out in reality. The actual proof will be in the numbers.
And to your point, I mean, you need the people at the top to change the hearts and minds. That's going to come from the top, and buy-in from everyone in the industry. So, Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today. And please, everyone, go read the series. I found it to be incredibly informative.
Thanks.